church. It's important because essentially the church needs to be about missions. When it comes down to it, it's part of every believer's calling. And our job as church leaders is to empower every believer's calling.
Because the gospel demands it. The gospel demands a focus on the lost. Our faith is a proselytizing faith. That's what it is. We reach people who don't know about Jesus.
Because this is the great commandment, not the great suggestion, but the great commandment, that we would love God and love people, and that's really in the hardwiring or the DNA of what happens in our hearts as leaders.
Jesus said, Matthew 28, go into the world, preach the gospel. It's a great commission, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's important. That's what brings vitality. I think people become alive when they're engaged on mission, whether it's local, overseas, or whatever. That makes people come alive. And I think it's our job, too, our role as church leaders, to help people see God at work globally.
Paul had this burning ambition to take the gospel where Christ had not yet been named. Without that, I think what happens is, churches like ours, churches that I know about, it's very easy to just take your own ministries in your church and define that as your missionary vision. The problem with that is we're the ones who benefit from those things. So we support our youth program. Well, that's where our teenagers go. We support our children's ministries. Well, that's where our children go. We look after seniors. Well, there are seniors who have grown up in the church. So it's genuine ministry, all right, but it's benefiting us. And I think there's a summons to reach faces that we don't know, reach people that have not heard the gospel and don't have a chance to hear the gospel. Without that, I think churches can easily just turn inward and become kind of self-centered. If you want your people to be generous with your church, I think your church has to be broad-hearted in reaching the world with the gospel.
God sent his Son, and we are to be senders as well.
It's really big for me is that people are on mission with you. There's a united sense of moving forward, and really the heartbeat, that vitality is shared by everybody, and you just sense that in the community.
Here's what I think. I think the excitement and the buy-in on the congregation lies on how well the vision and how well the leader sells the vision to the congregation about mission. So really, excitement depends on pastoral leadership. And are you yourself excited about this?
First thing it's done for our church, or at least it's en route to doing, is it helps our people think of the gospel as something incredibly precious. There is no other way for people to be saved except the gospel. If you aren't thinking about people getting saved, you won't treasure the gospel. Your church will get all tied up in all sorts of smaller things.
I think our relationship with international missions has just grown steadily, and they've been very much involved as an ongoing partner in our mission going forward. We have a number of global workers who have been raised up right from our own community, and so we've seen them move through that process. That's been amazing, and so we've been able to see that kind of recognition and releasing, which is one of our values, happening at the international level. So that kind of partnership is amazing.
Here's what I think. It's everyone in our church wants to be part of something bigger than themselves. And so when you partner with international missions, they do the work of making sure that missionaries are looked after, making sure that there's an accountability structure in place, making sure that things are happening on the field way better than a local church could. And so I think we win by partnering, because you just buy into the same thing and people can then do what they do more effectively through the accountability structures that are set in place.
Partnering or stepping out and being willing to commit to international missions. Sometimes as pastors we feel as though I just don't know how much more I can do, or maybe our own local vision is taking so much of our time and our effort and our energy and our resources. But what I've found is that as we do step out and as we are obedient, that it really, we find life in places that we wouldn't have found them before. We find that there's more excitement in the hearts of the congregation. There's more of a passion for worship. There's more of a receptivity to His Word. There's more people that come to know Christ, that are baptized, that are being baptized in the Holy Spirit. And as people in the congregation give, there's just a greater heart of God in them as well. So they're experiencing the life and the love of God as they are obedient to the Lord. Something else happens that I think is of a keen interest to those of us that are watching our general finances. I found that as we are sacrificial in missions giving, that our general fund doesn't go down. In fact, our general fund goes up. And so there's a great blessing in the life and the vitality of our churches as we stretch forward and we're obedient to that call of God.
Secondly, it gives us something big to pray about. It's very easy, like with your finances, it's very easy with your praying to just focus on the people in your church, the people in your congregation, the needs of your congregation. And there's certainly a place for that. But somewhere along the way, Jesus taught us how to pray in the Lord's Prayer, but the only thing he ever commanded us to pray about was reaching the lost. And so it helps to give your people something big to labor around in prayer. Tonight, while this is being filmed, we'll have 250 people who are gathering here at the church, and we'll do nothing but pray for our missionaries, pray for missions field, pray for the lost. So it gives people something big to pray about. And thirdly, and this is maybe a more selfish benefit, I found that it helps our church when we need to raise finances for something in-house. Our church is 25 years old, and there's all sorts of things we've had to do. Parking lot, lights, heating, air conditioning. We spent $1.5 million on this church in the last 5 years. And the reason people will respond, so we haven't had to go in debt at all, is because they trust us that we gave far more than that to missions over the last 5 years. So they trust us that we're not going to be selfish and inward with our finances. So it's actually helped us in terms of financing things in our own church when people know deep inside that we have a heart that goes far beyond the walls of our church.
See the nations bow for all the world to know I'm living for.
Don't be scared. Have the faith. Here's a very real issue, because you start to worry about, well, what about our general fund as a church? What about the money coming in for us? What about my team? What about my staff? What about everything here? One thing we have experienced is probably the positive repercussions of always pouring into missions. We've never been lacking. And I think there's a biblical concept in that. When you do great commission work, you yourself, as the home church, will see God's blessing in greater ways. So I would encourage you to say it's a step of faith, it's a step of trust, but do it. Don't be afraid of the financial ramifications, because I think God's bigger than that.
My first thought is that it has to be with your heart. There has to be something on the inside that says this is right, this is what Jesus is calling us to, and the Spirit is going to empower us forward. That's number one. Without that, there is no start. I think the second thing is that you find those around you that share that passion, and they're willing to come alongside. And you don't have to start big. It's not about comparison. It's really about saying, what is God calling us to do? So you start with one. That's what we did. We started with one global worker, and now we have 12. And God was faithful, and He will be faithful if you give it a start. And that's the bottom line. You got to take the step, and we believe absolutely God will meet us all along the way, and He has over the last 10 years. We have no doubt He'll do it for the next 20.
I think the question is good because it starts with the pastor. Everything starts with the pastor's heart. A pastor has to see the gospel as something precious. He has to see the gospel as the only way for people to be saved. And so I think there's a theological starting point for any pastor. You don't have to go on missions trips. If you're in a church where you can afford to do that, where your church sends you on those kind of trips, I've been blessed to go on a few of those myself. But you don't have to go on missions trips to have a heart for missions. You do have to treasure the gospel, and you do have to value the lost. Preach to your people about that. We'll start in I'm not trying to harp on our church, but we'll start in 3 weeks, 15 Sunday nights on Protestant truths around the cross of Christ and why the world needs it. 15 weeks. People get grounded in that, and when it's important to them, they get a heart for missions. And the last thing I would say, I talked recently with a pastor of a pretty large church near here that has a really big debt, and he said to me, I'd love to give more to PAOC missions, but I can't. And the reason I can't is we just don't have any funds left at the end of the month. And I asked them, I said, what do you do when your people come to you and they say they've got big mortgages and lots of bills and they can't afford to tithe or they can't afford to give proportionately to the church? And he said, well, I tell them that if they'll honor the Lord, that he'll bless them and their needs will be met. And I said to him, you better pray that God fills your church up with really stupid people, because if he fills your church up with intelligent people, they're going to see the inconsistency of that right away. Start where you are and make it, churches see how you spend your money. They see how you spend your prayer time. And so lead in that direction. It'll do nothing but benefit you in every single way in your church.
Lead it and lead it well and sell it. And that sounds perhaps a little bit more business oriented or even marketing, but essentially you market to your congregation the value of what it means to be a mission-minded church. I promise you, you will never ever regret that. You win every time because it is putting biblical mandate first.
Words like loving, giving, caring, sharing.
Yeah.
For me, biblical.
Yeah.
Huge. It's written all over Scripture. That's the way you're supposed to do church. We saw it in the early church in Acts.
To mind, is Jesus like? Jesus had the vision that went beyond the local context in which he was at, and I think we need to do the same thing. I think generous is another word that would describe a heart of a church that's engaged internationally. We want to give. And I think there's a level of passion. There's a desire to reach. It's not something that needs to be pulled out like a sore tooth. This is something that we want to do. We're engaged and we're passionate about it.
Wise, because I think there's wisdom that comes with empowering people and being a church that does this. This might sound odd, but Christian. I think it's the job of every Christian to do this, and I don't think we have a choice to be about missions or to not. I think this is what we are supposed to be about, and so it's embracing our calling and who we are. I think healthy is a word. When you do this, you're a healthy church, you're a healthy congregation, and I remember hearing this saying. It's kind of a statement that, and I think it fits with missions. Like you can't do everything for everyone. So a lot of people like to check out and say, well, we can't do it. But do for one what you can do, what you can't do for all. So do for one what you can't do for all. I think is a great thing when it comes to missions. Like understanding, okay, we're going to own this, or we're going to go support that, we're going to do that. And that just brings vitality to any congregation.